Hilda, Chapter 8. The Rain is to Blame, Part 1. As the early morning light seeped through the small basement window, Bow's footsteps creaked softly on the stairs. She appeared, holding a small bundle in her hands, a mix of tints, powders, and a few battered brushes. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she set the items down on the makeshift table. "These are all I had," she said. I looked at the assortment of makeup tools and smiled. "That's perfect." I could barely hold back my excitement. "You don't know what can I do with this?" She raised an eyebrow, curious. "Is that so?" "Oh, you'd be surprised," I grinned. "Back in middle school, I got a prize for our school theater production. You should have seen me back in my work. I transformed the whole cast. Nobody could believe they were the same people." Bauer let out a small laugh, the first genuine one I'd seen from her in days. "A theater award?" I took up one of the brushes, examining it thoroughly, and grinned. "Watch me work magic now." I gestured for her to sit, and she settled down, giving me a curious, slightly skeptical look. "Just trust me," I murmured, picking up a bead of powder and dabbing it across her cheeks, then darkening her eyebrows and adding shadows under her eyes. As I continued, her face softened, and I could see her walls coming down, if only a little. After a few minutes of work, I stepped back, assessing her newly roughened appearance. "There," I announced, satisfied. "I could fool anyone with this." She glanced at herself in the mirror, her expression shifting as she took in the stranger looking back at her. "You've got a knack for this," she admitted. "See, you're in good hands." I patted her shoulder. "No one will even recognize us." I turned my attention to the small mirror and grabbed what little was left of the supplies. I dabbed some powder on my face, muting my usual features, and added dark circles beneath my eyes. With careful strokes, I transformed my appearance, hollowing my cheeks, roughening my look, and dusting my hair to look unkempt. Power watched me work, her eyes flicking between the mirror and my face. "You really do know what you're doing," she murmured, almost in awe. I smirked, leaning closer to the mirror, adding the final touches. "I told you, school theater taught me well." When I finished, I turned to her, my own face barely recognizable now. "Think we can pass as strangers?" I asked, with a hint of playfulness, though the weight of our escape still lingered. She studied me for a moment and then nodded, impressed. "If I didn't know better, I'd say you were someone else entirely." I gave her a small, reassuring smile, though I felt the same strange tension in my stomach. This disgust, this transformation, felt like the final step, a quiet farewell to the person I used to be, and deep down, I knew that neither of us could afford to look back now. We sat together in the stillness of the living room, our bags by our feet, each packed with only the essentials. Bauer's eyes roamed the room, lingering on the small things that must have held years of memories. The worn armchair in the corner, the little sack of books on the table, the embroidery she had started months ago but never finished. Her gaze was quiet, almost reverent, as though she was trying to absorb every detail, to remember every shadow and line. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, giving her the space to feel the weight of leaving it all behind. I knew better than to disrupt this silent revel. We didn't talk about Max, her cat, who had been her once constant companion through so much. She'd made the hard decision to give him away to a neighbor who had promised to look after him. I imagined how she must already miss him, his familiar warmth, the gentle way he curled against her at night, but she had said nothing about him since, as though speaking of it would bring a fluid of emotions she can't handle. In the silence, I felt a pang of guilt, knowing I was part of the reason she had to let go of all of this. I wanted to say something to acknowledge the pain I knew she was bearing deep inside, but words felt useless. So I just sat there, watching her in the dim morning light as she took her home one last time, saying her goodbyes to the life she'd built. After a long pause, she closed her eyes and took a slow, deep breath, steadying herself. When she opened them again, her gaze was clear, her face softened with a quiet acceptance. Barbara nodded to herself, just once, as if sealing a promise, and then looked over at me. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with something heavy, something final. I nodded. The low rumble of an engine broke the silence, faint but unmistakable from outside. Bauer's face remained stoic, though a small flicker of relief flashed in her eyes. "It's Bruno," she murmured, a subtle reassurance that everything was going according to plan. I nodded, feeling my heart begin to pound harder. This was it, the beginning of everything we'd prepared for, yet it felt like stepping into an abyss. We stood, grabbing our bags, and I felt a chill race down my spine as I cast one last glance in the team's silent room. Bruno was supposed to take us to the station, where the real journey would begin. It seemed simple, just one step after the other, but the weight of what lay ahead hung over us like a shadow. I watched Bauer as she squared her shoulders, gathering her strength. She had been through so much already, had sacrificed everything she could for this moment, and now she was doing it again. She looked at me, her expression both protective and resolute. "Let's go," she said quietly, and I followed her out, steeling myself for what lay ahead. As we stepped into the cool morning air, I spotted Bruno waiting by the car, a man of few words who had taken on more risk than we could ever repay. He gave us a quick nod, his gaze lingering on Bauer for a second longer, perhaps acknowledging the weight of her choice. Without a word, we climbed into the car, the heavy silence only punctuated by the sound of the engine. The quiet felt like a fragile thread holding us together, and as we drove toward the station, the streets barely stirring in the dawn, I clung to every second, wondering what lay on the other side of our departure. I settled into the back seat, watching the world slip by through the window as Bauer climbed in next to Bruno. As we began moving, they quickly fell into conversations, voices low as they reviewed each part of the plan, what to say if anyone asked questions, where to part ways, and what signals to look out for. Bauer's tone held a firmness, and Bruno responded with calm reassurance, the kind of understanding only siblings seem to share. But it wasn't all business. Between the serious points, they'd exchanged moments that felt lighter. A comment about how Bruno needed a haircut, Bauer teasing him about his driving, small beats of banter, fragments of a brother and sister simply sharing a moment in the early light of dawn. As I watched, I felt a pang of something familiar and distant. It reminded me of Hans and Karl, of the endless days that had stretched out with them by my side, how everything about my childhood had been colored by their presence, their laughter, their arguments, even the long silences where I just sit nearby and feel a sense of home. Yes, I missed them. I missed the sound of their voices, the comfort of their routines, the unspoken security they brought. I looked at Bauer and Bruno, catching glimpses of that same bond in the way he tilted his head toward her when she spoke, how she'd reach out to give his arm a small squeeze. They were like a mirror, reflecting what had once been a part of my world. I couldn't help but feel a strange ache, a realization that even in all her strength and resolve, Bauer had her own foundations, her own family, that she was risking it all for me, for us. As we neared the station, their voices grew quieter, and a spoken understanding settling over us. The weight of the journey, of leaving, and of all we were leaving behind filled the silence. The station came into view, its outline stark against the pale morning sky, and I felt a chill of anticipation. The life I knew, that they knew, was slipping further behind with each turn. The station loomed just ahead, bustling with people moving in every direction, voices blending into a murmur of hurried conversations and clacking footsteps. Bruno pulled the car to a stop, and we sat there for a beat, none of us ready to break the fragile quiet of those last moments together. Bauer turned to her brother, reaching out for a hug, and he stepped forward, wrapping his arms around her with a fierce, almost protective embrace. I watched, feeling both a warmth for them and a distant ache, wondering if Hans or Cole and I had ever shared a moment like that. My mind searched back, but I couldn't recall a goodbye hug or any of those simple gestures that seemed now to hold so much meaning. After moments they broke apart and Bruno turned to me. His eyes were steady, searching mine as if trying to understand the weight of his sister's decision, the risk they were about to take together. I looked away, avoiding that gaze, feeling like I was intruding, or worse, like I was the reason he had to let her go. He leaned down, a small, almost reluctant smile breaking through his expression. "Take care, kiddo," he said, his voice gentle but filled with something unspoken, as if passing an invisible torch of responsibility. I nodded, offering him a faint smile in return, a silent promise that I would do my best to keep us safe. Bauer gave his hand one last squeeze, and he nodded, eyes softening just a bit before he turned and walked back to the car. The engine rumbled to life, and without another word, he drove off, leaving us standing there, just two figures on the edge of a new beginning. Bauer took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring, probably signaling the start of our role play. We were stepping into the shoes of two strangers on paper, an ordinary mother and daughter who had every right to be at the station, ready for a day of travel, blissfully unaware of the chaos surrounding us. But that wasn't us. The show has just started. With each step toward the station entrance, the weight of our decision pressed down on me, a heavy cloak of fear and necessity. I felt the cool metal of my fake identification tucked safely in my pocket, a reminder of our fragile disguise. The bustling crowd swallowed us as we crossed through the threshold, the sound of laughter and chatter filling the air, contrasting sharply with the turmoil roiling in my stomach. As we navigated the sea of people, I couldn't help but glance at the faces around us, each person lost in their own story, their own fears, their own journeys. It felt surreal to think that among them we were harboring our secrets, playing parts in a larger, dangerous game. We approached the ticket counter, where a tired-looking attendant was half-heartedly greeting travelers. The line moved slowly, and I felt my heart racing as we stepped forward, knowing we were one step closer to escaping into our new identities. "Two tickets to Munich, please?" Bauer asked, her voice confident as she leaned closer to the counter, ensuring that her act was seamless. I held my breath, trying to project an air of calm as the attendant typed away, oblivious to the gravity of our situation. Each click of the keys echoed in my mind like a countdown. The moment felt stretched, like time itself had slowed, and I have wondered if we could really pull this off. Finally, the attendant handed over the tickets with a nod, and I felt a surge of relief wash over me. We had made it through the first hurdle, but as we turned away from the counter, the weight of what lay ahead settled on my shoulders once more. This was only the beginning, and the journey we were embarking on was fraught with uncertainty. As we boarded the train, a rush of voices and footsteps swirled around us, filling every inch of the platform. I tried to focus on Bauer's hand gripping mine, grounding me in the midst of the crowd, but my eyes couldn't help but wander, taking in the small details of people we passed, people with their own journeys, unaware of ours. A little girl caught my eye first, jumping up and down beside her mother, her laughter breaking through the fog of worry in my mind. She was light, unburdened, maybe 6 or 7, her feet leaving the ground as if gravity held no sway over her. Her mother looked down, offering a soft smile, adjusting the child's head as though protecting her from some invisible chill. Across from them, two women stood, engaged in quiet conversation. They wore modest coats, their hats neatly pinned, heads closed as if exchanging secrets. One clutched a small bucket of wildflowers, simple, delicate, almost out of place among the dingy platform surroundings. A couple leaned against each other nearby, the man with his arm wrapped around the woman's shoulders. They looked as if they were each other's whole world, lost in the private moments that seemed to shield them from everything else. I caught a glimpse of a smile on the woman's face as he murmured something to her, their eyes warm and gentle, and then there was a man with a green hat, standing alone at the edge of the platform that I never saw his face. These small fragments of strangers' lives blurred as Barra led me forward. We found our seats, surrounded by the steady hum of conversation and the chatter of luggage being stowed. I held my breath as the train jolted to life, pressing myself against the worn seat, watching as the station began to fade behind us. As the train rumbled forward, Bauer's grip on my hand softened but didn't release, and I could feel the weight of her tension even without looking at her. The two of us settled into a silence, one heavy with anticipation and the strange closeness of our roles, two people becoming someone else, bound to a fragile plan. Outside, the landscape slowly changed from the narrow streets of the town to the rolling countryside, fields blurring together as the train picked up speed. I kept my gaze on the window, catching glimpses of the farms and spare villages we've passed, wondering how far we'd get before anyone noticed we were gone. At one point, a conductor moved through the car, checking tickets and offering brief nods to passengers. I could feel Bauer's grip on me tighten as he neared her posture tense, ready to act. When he finally reached us, she handed over our tickets with a calm, practiced smile. The conductor gave them a glance, returned them with a nod, and moved on. Only then did I feel the tightness in my chest ease a little bit. Across the aisle, the little girl I'd seen earlier started to cry, her face crumpling as her mother tried to console her. Bauer watched them, something soft and distant in her expression. Her hand slid from mine to rest in her lap. After a while, Bauer leaned closer to me and murmured, "Try to sleep if you can." Her voice was low, almost too soft to hear, but I nodded, trying to relax against the seat. My eyes felt heavy, but my mind was far too restless. I wondered if sleep would come at all. I closed my eyes just for a moment, letting the rhythm of the train lull me. Somewhere in the half-dream, the worries slipped into each other, thoughts of the checkpoints ahead, of the strangers we would meet, and the other lives we'd left behind. I opened my eyes slowly, the gentle rhythm of the train still humming in my ears. My cheek rested against Bauer's lap, and I felt her hand, warm and steady, on my shoulder. For just a moment, everything felt still, almost safe. I didn't want to move, didn't want to let go of that rare feeling. Looking back, I think this was the last time I slept peacefully, the last time I could let my guard down. I shifted a bit, feeling her look down at me. Her eyes softened just as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're close now, just a few more minutes to Munich." We navigated through the crowded square, weaving around people and luggage, slipping through conversation that melted together in a low hum. Bauer's hand gripped mine tightly, each squeeze sending a pulse of reassurance through me. I could feel her strength in that grip, a silent promise that we'd make it through this together. We stopped near the edge of the platform, settling onto a worn bench. I scanned the faces around us, nerves prickling under my skin. Then I saw her, a woman with a faded scarf wrapped tightly around her head, her gaze sharp and cautious as it darted over us. When our eyes met, she gave the faintest nod. She approached us, barely pausing, and leaned down to speak quietly to Bauer, her voice low. "Get up and walk with me. Stay close and don't look back." Bauer pulled me along as she rose to follow the woman, our steps falling into a synchronized rhythm. I held back, letting them lead, absorbing every detail without a word. The woman kept her voice soft and steady as she spoke to Bauer, explaining the next steps. I strained to listen, catching beats and pieces. "We'll keep to the back street. There's an alley near the edge of the city that leads to the second point. Try to blend in. The fewer eyes, the better," she murmured, glancing over her shoulder. Bauer gave a small nod, her grip never loosening from mine. I focused on the words, letting the sounds of the square fade, focusing on the plan, on her voice, on Bauer's warmth at my side. The woman led us into a secluded alley, its narrow confines shrouded in shadows. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel it clinging to my skin like the weight of a heavy blanket. Bauer's grip tightened around my hand as we stepped deeper into the dimness. As we emerged from the shadows, I spotted a group of others gathered near the far end of the alley. They stood close together, the body language speaking volumes. Bauer glanced around, her eyes scanning their faces, and I could see the flicker of recognition. This was a shared fear, a shared purpose. One black man stood slightly apart from others, adjusting his head nervously, tugging at the brim as if it could somehow shield him from what was to come. His eyes darted around, betraying a restless energy that only seemed to amplify the anxiety in the air. I could feel my heart racing in sync with his fidgeting, each adjustment echoing my own unsteady nerves. Next to him was a young mother, her face pale and drawn, yet resolute. She clutched her child to her chest, greeting the small form protectively as if the warmth of her embrace could shield the innocent from the harsh realities surrounding us. The child, blissfully unaware of the gravity of the situation, nestled against her, fingers tangled in the hair, while she cast furtive glances at the strangers who were now part of our journey. The woman who had led us here began to explain the next part of our escape. "We'll move quickly," she said, her voice a fierce whisper. "Stay close to one another, and whatever you do, do not draw attention. The checkpoints are tightening." I felt the gravity of her words settle over us, and I looked around the faces, each one reflecting the same mix of fear and determination I felt. We were all strangers bound by shared fate, clinging to the hope that the next step would lead us away from danger and toward freedom. The train pulled away from the station with a gentle shudder, and I felt the vibrations hum beneath my seat. We settled into an inconspicuous car, its faded upholstery blending seamlessly into the worn atmosphere. I scanned the faces around us, a mix of travelers lost in their own thoughts. The air was thick with an odd silence that felt almost suffocating. I couldn't bring myself to speak, not now. My heart raced as I took a moment to collect my thoughts, to steady the whirlwind of emotions swirling within me. Instead, I reached for Bauer's hand, my fingers intertwining with hers. It was a simple gesture, but it offered a sense of comfort, a tether to reality amidst the uncertainty that enveloped us. The seats were arranged in pairs, and we sat across from each other, the distance between us amplifying the tension. I wanted to reach out, to whisper reassurance, but the fear of drawing attention kept my lips sealed. We were trying to blend in, to be just another set of faces in a crowded train, but the weight of our shared secret felt almost palpable. I glanced around again. The man in the corner wore a newspaper like a shield, his eyes darting over the headlines while pretending to be engrossed. A couple across the aisle whispered to one another, their expression tense and wary. Each of us was playing a part, but I felt the ache of our isolation, the knowledge that we were all hiding something monumental beneath the surface. The train rolled on, but an unsettling announcement crackled over the intercom, warning us of an upcoming checkpoint. My heart lurched, pounding violently in my chest as I fought to keep my gaze low, avoiding the piercing eyes of the officers making their rounds. I felt Bauer's presence beside me, her calm demeanor and anger in the storm of anxiety swirling around us. But I could see it in her hands. They trembled ever so slightly, betraying the calm visage she was trying to maintain. As the officers walked down the aisle, their heavy boots thudding against the floor, I kept my head down, focusing on the worn fabric of my skirt. I could feel my pulse quickening with every step they took closer. When one officer barely glanced at our papers, relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Then it happened. The couple sitting in front of us cut the officer's attention. He paused, scrutinizing the man's face with a look that made my stomach drop. "You're him," the officer said sharply, and I could feel the tension spike in the air. My breath hitched in my throat as he continued. "Yes, you're him." The man's expression shifted from confusion to dread in an instant. He stammered, trying to deny it, but the officer wasn't having any of it. In a swift, brutal motion, he lunged forward, smashing the man against the seat. I gasped, a sharp intake of breath that felt like a scream trapped inside me. Bauer's instincts kicked in. She instinctively covered my eyes with her hands, shielding me from the chaos erupting in front of us. I could feel the warmth of her hands against my cheek, and I squeezed my eyes shut, wanting desperately to block out the horrifying scene unfolding just beyond my side. But even with my eyes closed, the sound pierced through: shouts, the scuffle of boots against the floor, the clatter of belongings being tossed aside. My heart raced, pounding in my ears as I leaned into Bauer, seeking solace in her protective presence. I could sense her trying to keep me calm, her body tense as she remained alert, ready to react to whatever might happen next.